in Kenya, mobile money penetration is so high. You buy things in the supermarket using mobile money. You pay for your Uber using mobile money. You pay for public transport. You buy vegetables by the roadside using mobile money. I think over 60% of Kenya's GDP actually runs on mobile money. If you ask me, the best tech that ever happened in Africa is WhatsApp in terms of social media.
It's the same. It's the same in a lot of places, actually. That will not be an eye opener. Like even the construction sites these days in the UK, and I'm not 100% certain about US, but very WhatsApp driven.
When you're building in Africa, you have to build for your own ecosystem in the sense that you're building. So, for example, we started with distribution of construction materials. Now, you somehow have to also build for your logistics because you don't really have that advanced company that has figured out warehousing and logistics in a non-traditional way.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Bricks Bytes podcast, where we dive into construction and AEC technology. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
Cool. Kagure, well, I'm very delighted to be speaking to you today. And I say that because typically on a Friday afternoon in the UK, we are speaking to folks in the US. But today we're very lucky to have someone from the continent of Africa, specifically Kenya.
Yes.
So Kagure, thank you so much. So thank you so much for joining us. And could we start, I guess, by telling us a little bit about your background? How did you go from... you've been around the globe, right? I saw some places on your LinkedIn profile: Hong Kong, US, UK, and now Kenya. So, yeah, excited to have you. Tell us how it all happened.
Cool. So just to share with you a background and how it all came together to starting Jumba. I was born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya, and went to the US for my college. So I did my undergrad in civil engineering before proceeding to do urban planning. And here I already knew that I was interested in the construction world. My dad is a contractor by profession. And so I was brought up going to construction sites. So construction has really never been scary for me, just because I thought that's what you do. That's where you go wait for your dad. So had studied civil engineering, but then really discovered that I really also loved and cared about how the built environment intersected with human beings and how people lived. And so that had been my dream. In terms of the construction world. But in my last year of grad school, Uber came calling. They were launching in Kenya, and they were looking for somebody who understood transportation in Nairobi. And that had been my area of focus. And so that is how I moved back. So I actually joined the team. And it shaped me in terms of how I've always thought about technology. It was my first intersection with technology. I had gone to school in the Bay Area, but really I was about construction. And a lot of times when you're in construction, you really don't see how it fits in the world of tech. But here was a real life situation where it was to do with transportation. Came in. Uber had launched in Africa as a credit card product. It was not doing well in sub-Saharan Africa, outside of South Africa, just because the concept of credit card payments is almost non-existent here. And so Nairobi made a case that, payment, let's try out mobile money cash. And I remember at that point, HQ in San Francisco being like, hey, you guys are insisting on this, but you can go ahead, but we will not fully build for you. So back then we ran Uber on Excel sheets. What that
Yeah.
would mean is that, a driver took
What year was this, Kagure? Sorry.
2015.
What year was this?
2015.
2015. Okay.
So drivers would take trips. We would run a script and try reconcile on Excel sheets, and then have the drivers line up and we reconcile one at a time with their mobile money.
Wow.
But as tough as it was and manual as it was, it really unlocked Nairobi. And it became the first city to actually roll out 100% cash in the Uber world. And the reason was that, hey, we use M-Pesa. But it taught me something. You have great tech that has worked, and at that point had seen it work in the Bay Area. But it was struggling here because of that whole market fit. And the reason here was mobile money. So with layering M-Pesa and allowing for M-Pesa, it took off and grew quite significantly. So that was the first thing I learned, that, you've got to adapt your ideas to the market. And it really can work. And then the second thing is, don't fear trying. This was, at that stage, Uber had raised quite significant money, and was still having some things being ran manually or on Excel sheets. And so don't be afraid to run. Don't be afraid to experiment.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Were you getting, because you were pushing for this cash, well, you had to, right? Did you get a bit of resilience from like Uber as an organization from a higher level? Like, were they pressuring you as a leader within Kenya to be like, not like, we understand, but you need to try and make card work?
So that was always the case, in terms of how cash versus card, the idea of it worked. But the beauty was that with the structure that there were other multiple emerging markets that were facing a similar problem. So I remember the head of Middle East and Africa being a huge champion for this, right? Because he understood the context. I think that helped. But in HQ, the dev teams, as an example, sitting in San Francisco, could not understand where this was coming from. So we found a happy middle, right? You make it work with the tools you have on the ground, make a case for why something should be built for you.
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
So in your story, did you? I didn't. Just to recap on the bit about, you said M-Pesa, was it?
M-Pesa.
Was this?
So,
which means, what does that mean?
M-Pesa is mobile money. In Kenya, mobile money penetration is so high. You buy things in the supermarket using mobile money. You pay for your Uber using mobile money. You pay for public transport. You buy vegetables by the roadside using mobile money. I think over 60% of Kenya's GDP actually runs on mobile money.
So does by mobile money, this is not like this is not. This is how I'm uneducated I am on this topic, but so this is not like money within a bank account that you hold. It's a slightly different mechanism.
Yes, so no bank account. It is a wallet tied to your phone number. So the penetration is very high. So with your phone number, you can send money to somebody. You can pay a bill. A general bill like in a restaurant. You could also pay your electricity and water bill. So very assigned to your specific phone number. It's how we pay for government services. And in fact, so that is how a lot of Nairobi moves. So when it comes to even how we've built Jumba, one of the things we had to build early on is how you can auto-reconcile payments from customers that are coming from mobile money or M-Pesa. Because the idea is people may not be using bank accounts, but they sure do use their mobile number and a mobile wallet.
Interesting. We'll get to that later on. So what happened after the Uber experience?
Yeah, so at that point, it was a time for Uber strikes around the world. And it was the same here. And I was this young person who was the face of the company. When the drivers went on strike, we were getting calls from the head of the police in the country, the office of the president, and all that. And I had to represent why Uber had to stay in Kenya and why it made sense. I always joke, one time we're watching news, 9 p.m. primetime news, and I see a driver walking by with my name, Kagure must go. Because they're to
Do you
them,
have a
you're the one
screenshot
who's
of it?
making this decision. They don't realize you're this massive company. But
Yeah.
I was thrown into the world of, policy engagement, etc., and really trying to explain why it made sense for the company to stay in the country. So it unlocked a skill I did not know I had at that point, and that actually led me to my next job. So I was headhunted by an EdTech company that was running. It was running over 400 schools in Kenya, so it was one of the largest local schools in the world. And at that point, they were facing quite critical and fierce opposition from the Kenyan government, and they needed somebody to help them, walk through that journey. So I moved to that, helping them with their PR and helping them with their policy work to help them get registered in Kenya. And I was quite passionate about this. I am a product of education. That is how most of my doors were unlocked and how I was able to, get my secondary and my university education through my grad school through scholarships. So quite passionate about the concept of low-income families and children having access to education. So I did that for about 1.5 years. Before a friend of mine during my Uber days had started a logistics company, and they needed somebody to work with them. And so they invited me to work with them, operating in markets outside Nigeria. So working with different teams. And here, different policies in different markets. So this is different African countries. So as I have done this now, I mentioned I'm a civil engineer. So when I moved back, I became a real estate developer. That is what I did. So in Kenya, we have what we call a side hustle culture. Like, how do you invest your money? And what is this business you invest in? And for me, it was in real estate. And so I would go to the bank, try to get a loan, and then take a construction loan and try to build apartments, which I then rent out or I sell.
Yeah.
And it was difficult.
Okay. So now I can see where Jumba is starting to form.
Yes. It was very difficult getting access to financing. The banks are very terrified of construction. Because of how long it takes to pay. Somebody coming from the background, but I didn't study here from a university perspective, figuring out who the architects are, who are the engineers. They're not actually allowed to advertise legally. And so you really have to figure out how to get, a contact. And when you do getting the construction materials, there's a different price. If you walk in and you look like you don't know what the price is, it can be 3x higher because we have the bargaining, haggling kind of culture. And so when I finished my first project of development, I remember quite a number of people would reach out. How did you do it? Can we have a discussion? I realized just how hard it was for me as somebody who is trained in the sector. My dad is from the sector, but it was terrible. I said, there must be something here, something that can be done. If tech has worked in ride hailing, it's worked in education, in logistics, it surely has a future with construction. So I decided to have my world of construction and my world of tech merge, and that is how Jumba was born.
Lovely.
Yes.
Okay. Did you, were you the primary did you have a team of founders? Like, how did what's the founder's journey? Because I noticed on your website there's more than one of you, but I'm just curious how the journey began.
So basically there was two of us. It is one of me right now in the founding team.
Okay.
So essentially, in terms of thinking about who we started with, it was looking at the skill set I had. I've worked in ops, in expansion and growth, and within tech companies, but I am not really a dev. And so I was looking at that point for, partners who I can work with in the development, in the tech dev world. And that is how I went about choosing who would come on board as a co-founder then. And then the other thing is when I was looking at our skill sets, we knew that being the world of construction, at some point there will be a discussion in terms of money, financing, financial services, because construction really, anytime you have a discussion, the topic of funds never fails to come up. So that's really how I went about setting up my leadership team. So that was the journey. And at that point, really made the decision to move from employment now to this. And to your point, the first thing I had to do was actually drop out of my, as you mentioned, my England days. So really giving up.
You dropped out your PhD, right?
I was doing a PhD in sustainable urban development. And I made the choice that I felt that tech was a better choice for me. I always joke and say, I don't know how my dad feels about that. He really had a daughter doing a PhD, you're starting this whole thing in construction. But it's because I really believe in the future of tech and construction in Africa. If you look outside Nairobi, outside the window, you always just see building coming up. A lot of infrastructure deficit and a lot of governments recognizing that they do want to build infrastructure. So there's quite something there. That's actually why I made that jump to do construction tech.
Nice. Okay. I have some questions about like the funding and like the early days. But first off, let's jump into it. Can you just tell us what Jumba is?
Yes. So Jumba is a construction tech company that is focused on the supply chain of construction materials. And we create efficiencies through connecting hardware stores to manufacturers. And that is how we started. And now we actually have a SaaS product which came as technology we built for ourselves that we are now offering to manufacturers and distributors of construction materials, really helping them with the whole order management, their logistics and fulfillment, and just being able to incorporate AI in terms of how they engage with the customers from a quotation perspective and how they receive payments from customers using checks.
So it's a B2B marketplace, effectively?
Yes, so we do have a B2B marketplace arm, and then we do have the SaaS arm of the business.
Okay, understood. So you're connecting manufacturers of materials to the hardware stores. So hardware stores can go on and I don't know, say they're purchasing cement or something similar and find like a list of manufacturers or whoever it might be with the pricing and so on and so forth, and then order the quantity that they need.
Yes, so the way it operates here, or the way it works in Kenya, it does include also the element of, so we work with cement, steel, and wire products as our core products. So basically the structure of a building. And so hardware stores would place an order to us, and then we would place a corresponding order to the manufacturers. So the manufacturers here will not do the distribution, so that would fall under us. And so we are able to place a corresponding order and then be able to deliver from our distribution center. So we do what we call bundling, which is essentially your order may have products from multiple manufacturers. So we are able to get, say, the cement and then combine with nails and deformed bars and be able to deliver to a customer. Our core customers are actually customers in cities outside Nairobi. And the reason, so this would be tier 2 towns, tier 3 towns. And the reason is that manufacturing is quite centralized in Kenya, in the major cities, while development is happening everywhere. So the farther out you are from the capital city, the more you struggle to access construction materials.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. And you mentioned some core products. I'm curious, how and why did you decide to just focus on some core products? Why not go for like windows or doors or something like a little bit more later in the construction cycle?
So we've actually been tackling this one stage at a time. So we began with cement. So cement in Kenya is sold in 50 kg bags. We don't mainly do bulk cement. And the reason we started with this, it's the core construction material. There hasn't been anyone who's been able to satisfy the market from a distribution perspective of cement. So started with that, but cement in Kenya is commoditized. So it's a high volume, low margin product. And so the next thing for us was to go into what is a complementary product. So moved into the steel, so deformed bars and tubes. And then the next stage was the wire product. So the nails, etc. So what we see as our stage after this would be now the finishes. So selecting a component of finishes and be able to tackle that. So, and the thinking here was the volumes you have to be, to create efficient distribution, you've got to have the ability to move trucks into multiple areas of the country or multiple towns. And so the bulkier products allow you to be able to move the truck because the transport component of it can pay for the load or for the truck to move to a specific area of town. That's the thinking behind it. And then now when you get to the finishes, which tend to be lighter, they can be, layered on top of the vehicles that are moving in different parts of the country.
Okay, fine. So it's very much based or restricted by the loading capacity of a delivery vehicle. Is that right? So you effectively have to try and load up the vehicle as much as possible, so you're getting most utilization out of that vehicle. Therefore, much more efficiency.
Yes. So it is a method creating efficiency. Now with our, and the main reason here is that at the hardware level and the distribution level, there is that even before the tech need, there's a true need in distribution. There's a true gap that exists there. Now, when you come to the finishes, which are more aesthetics driven, thousands more of SKUs, I think now becomes the role of tech becomes even stronger. And so as the business is doing more and more SKUs, what we are seeing is that the value prop for technology now increases. All of a sudden, comparison of the color of the tile, they will become more important. And your value proposition now increasingly becomes more tech-led as compared to steel and cement, where you're using your technology for efficiencies. But, a bar of steel, deformed is deformed if I'm looking for the same size, right? So it also, the business then evolves as you handle different types of SKUs.
How many hardware stores do you have on the platform? Like, just so we can grasp an understanding of the size and scale that you're operating at now.
So we work with about 700 active hardware stores. And to define hardware stores is that in Kenya, it is the core way of distribution in terms of that is where people building their own homes and small to medium-sized developers buy materials. To start with, Kenyans are more likely to build their own home than to buy. That is the culture here. So a majority of houses are built and not bought. So then what that means is that you've got to have a distribution or a way from construction materials to get to the neighborhoods where construction is going on. And the reason for this is that mortgages are extremely expensive at about 15% per annum. But if you're building your own house, whenever you get some money, you build, you stop, and then you continue to the next stage. Yeah, that's really the reason.
That's awesome.
And so it points out to, to your question, about how the African market may have its own nuances. And that's one of the things. So it creates the hardware stores, which can do turnovers anywhere from $50,000 monthly to millions of dollars monthly, depending on the size of the hardware store. And so these become the core customers that Jumba sells to. And then these customers may distribute eventually to developers or home builders who may not meet our minimum order quantity.
100% makes sense. Well, you answered my next question was going to be, why don't you target the people that are consuming the materials? But to be honest, I don't think you need to answer that, because based on some of the figures and the volume that the hardware stores are going with, it just makes sense, right? But maybe you have a plan to go after consumers at a later date. I'm not sure.
So if I think about the hardware stores, again, makes sense for the structure. As you move more and more into finishes, and it's now a matter of the taste of the developer, then that is where combining it with a stronger tech value proposition where they are able to see and compare what is in the market. Because right now, what you have to do, you literally have to go to the different stores in Kenya to know what is available. A lot of things are not even on our website when it comes to the construction world, unlike other markets. And so that then is where you think about how do you present information to be close to the customer and the variety, the pricing and transparency that comes with it. So at that point, as we do the finishes, that is where the developer would come in.
Got it. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Can you just tell us a little bit about the SaaS side of the product then that you mentioned previously?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, moving cement, steel, and wire products, you're moving high value goods, and you're selling to retailers, which means that you have high order frequency. You have trucks moving throughout the country. And so the first thing we actually had to do, understanding that the core need we were solving is a reliability issue, was that we needed to build technology that we would use internally that would layer on top of our ERP. Now, so this meant that we needed to build on how quotes are done. Customers will send you on WhatsApp a photo of a handwritten, something they've written on a piece of paper, send you a photo, and they're like, I'd like this and this and this. So we needed to figure out how do they take this information and turn it into a quote. So, and then the second thing is that you need to share quotes to customers who are in different locations. So you have to pull pricing based on where they are. And the nuance here is that being businessmen, they don't want the product price being separate from the delivery price. So you've got to be able to calculate it and embed it in the product price as you share a quotation. Then there would be multiple orders going to different locations, and you needed to have the status of each of the orders going to these locations. So eventually we had to build what we call a sales module that allowed us to know at any given time the order statuses, where you'd have different teams having different permissions. And then after that, we needed to build our own management for the trucks that we use, the on-demand trucks we use to deliver the goods. We needed to have an app to know where the drivers are, where the locations are. And so we ended up building tech that has allowed us to grow as a business. And so now it only made sense to externalize this technology. So through it, we now are building, we actually have built our SaaS product, and we're looking to deploy by 30th June in terms of externalization. So we're closing our first customer soon. Quite excited about that. And it's tech to manufacturers. How do the manufacturers and distributors in Kenya work? They have an ERP system at best. After that, everything runs on WhatsApp. In fact, if you ask me the best tech that ever happened in Africa is WhatsApp in terms of social media.
It's the same. It's the same in a lot of places, actually. That will not be an eye-opener. Like even the construction sites these days in the UK, and I'm not 100% certain about US, but very WhatsApp-driven.
Yeah. So imagine orders are posted by the sales team on this WhatsApp group that has directors, and and then they forward it, they take it and forward it to the finance team, and then they post the checks or the proof of payment in these groups. And then the ERP is used as a data entry system. And so what we have built is SaaS to solve for this, everything that is done before you enter to the accounting or finance system. That's what essentially is our SaaS product. And the start of it is in sales module, an AI reader, because reading checks, reading quotations, and converting them to what is used by the system, and then the AI analytics. And the whole idea is once you deploy this, you are then able to build it to payments, and processing payments and offering buy now, pay later products, even to the customers of manufacturers.
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
Yeah. Okay. Super interesting. I would like to touch on perhaps building the startup and with an emphasis and focus perhaps on what it's like to build a tech product focus within construction in Africa.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe I will just give you a very broad question there. What's it like building a tech product in Africa? And then depending on what you say, I will own in a little bit on some of the responses.
Okay, so I kind of alluded to it. When you're building in Africa, you have to build for your own ecosystem in the sense that you're building. So, for example, we started with distribution of construction materials. Now, you somehow have to also build for your logistics because you don't really have that advanced company that has figured out warehousing and logistics in a non-traditional way. So all of a sudden, you're caring about orders. You've got to have tech for your logistics. You've got to have tech a little bit for your warehousing. And so what often it means when you're building here, you're building multiple products. And what would be different businesses in other markets, because you're building to support even the support system that is needed for your business doesn't exist. So you got to build it for yourself. So while in other markets, you would find a tech company in logistics, in warehousing, you name it. Here you become it, so that is one of the core differences that I would say.
That's so funny, actually, you mentioned that, because when you mentioned all the tech, I was like, that's a lot of technology. And that's like very like typical, yeah, because like you say, you have I don't know if the right word is point solution, but I guess it is, because you have a piece of technology that specifically deals with that pain point. But as you explain and describe there, that you need to build the technology that encapsulates everything related to what you are building. So fascinating.
Yeah. And that tends to be the case. So you always think about it from an end-to-end perspective. So you end up building some other things to support your original goal. So I would say that is one of the things that exists. I think there's also excitement. I would say that we have been, the different markets have really developed in different ways. There is that excitement that tech can really change how things are done, especially in the construction sector. I think there's that recognition. You take in a market like Kenya, people have seen what mobile money has done and mobile lending. People have seen things like what we were discussing, what Uber has done. And so there's that recognition that, hey, an open-mindedness. We think technology can change how construction is being done. So I think that's something else that we see in the market. The third thing is adaptation to exactly what happens. If your market is a check market, if your market is a mobile money market, so you have those nuances that exist in the market that you've got to take into account. So I would say those are some of the things that you find when you're building for the African market. And then finally, it is that construction is a core sector. It makes up over 5% of the GDP in Kenya. Now, the market is massive. For a lot of people, the value proposition continues to be how, can they access construction materials affordably? And so you have to think about scales and economies of scale by being very aware that, at the end of it, how much it costs to pay for something is something you've got to always factor. And so these are some of the things that you find. And the successful companies, tech companies here, understand this, that it does have to do with economies of scale. And then last, I said lastly before that, I would say is that it takes a bit longer. And it's based on what we've talked about. You really have to build on a lot to support yourself. And once you're willing to put in the work, it does click. And then when it does, because of just how great the demand is, and how much there isn't anything else. It just clicks and works. So that is how I describe building in Africa.
Wonderful. How is it in terms of like talent for building the software and like running the company as an operation?
Okay.
One, and I'll go to my second question.
So I would say, speaking about Kenya in particular, talent is quite great in Kenya. So we have a strong human capital. Education is quite emphasized in this country. So what you find that is different is what I would consider the tech culture. It is not something you're predisposed to in the education system, or if you're coming from the corporate culture. So talent, people who are smart, yes, there are people who are smart. The culture of hustle, that is us, I think, with growing up with a lot of luck, which tends to be what you find in a lot of people. People really hustle here. So you get that in people. So what then that I find is something that usually one has to adopt and teach people is thinking from a skill perspective, thinking from a tech perspective. That's really now where I'd say usually work goes into to convert somebody from, say, traditional industry to the tech industry. We use local engineers. Our entire tech team is based in Kenya, is made up of Kenyan engineers. So we have that advantage of the last 10 years, the ecosystem has really grown. And then you also have big multinationals having offices here, Facebook, Google, Microsoft. So really building and encouraging the tech ecosystem in Kenya.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. How about fundraising? Because we were introduced to you by Fundamental, who we do some stuff with ourselves. So I'm very curious, perhaps how. Well, one, you can speak specifically about that relationship, but two, also, yeah, what is the perception of like investors? Because I know Fundamental are global, but obviously based in the more of the Western world, should we say? So yeah, could you talk to that?
Okay, so having an investor like Fundamental is actually quite great because they have invested in companies that are similar to Jumba, but in other markets.
Yes.
And so oftentimes having an investor who has an understanding of construction tech, it means that you have somebody you can go to when you can discuss strategy. They'll be like, oh, I saw company X and Z being at your stage 7 years ago. These are some of the mistakes that are made that maybe you shouldn't repeat them. Or, hey, this is normal. It happens, kind of thing. So having an advisor, an expert in your sector, an investor who's an expert in your sector, I would say has been one of the greatest things that we've had. Looking at funding here, there tends to be VCs that are focused on the African continent. So I do have on my cap table investors who are specifically focused on the African market. And then you have someone like Local Globe, who's EMEA based in London, who also has exposure in Africa and who's invested in us. And the way I think about it is 3 types of investors make sense. You want investors that have a local context so that when you say, hey, I'm struggling in X, Y, and Z, they'll be like, here's another company that has the same market challenge, right? And then you want somebody who has expertise like Fundamental in the construction sector. And then this investor is helping you walk the journey based on what they've seen in other markets, in other continents. And then finally, you want an investor who has, a global reach, a huge maker network and a huge investor. So somebody like Local Globe, because down here they introduce you to other investors. They are able to, if you're thinking of other areas, say it's now moving to SaaS or fintech, they will have companies within their portfolios that have the same, have gone through the same, they have adapted or added new revenue streams that may be outside the core construction. So that's really how I think about investors and how we've been able to manage getting investors to invest in Jumba.
Okay, cool. Very good. So how does Kenya My understanding of Africa is that it's like divided into kind of like you have like the north of Africa, South Africa, and then you called it Sub-Sahara. I think you mentioned it as
Mhm.
earlier. Did I get those regions right? I'm not. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't.
So,
Um,
go on.
yeah. So I would just be interested to hear like how each of the regions, perhaps, or the core areas within Africa, what's it like in terms of companies and opportunities?
So we tend to, the continent tends to be there's four major hubs in the tech world.
For.
So you have Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. So which is what,
Mm-hmm.
and then, and the different markets have had innovation and different reasons for their innovation. So you have a market like Kenya, which is considered more advanced in terms of mobile money and financial services. Then on the flip, you will have a market like Nigeria, which has struggled in financial services, and therefore their greatest tech has been in fintech, right? And then you will have a market there like South Africa, which is a bit more advanced in terms of their systems operations. Then Egypt, a large market that also is building a lot on fintech and financial services. So these tend to be the four markets. Now, what is interesting is historically, the thinking has always been, then it makes sense if I start a company in Kenya, the next market should be Nigeria and then maybe Egypt because it's the core market. However, I think
Mm-hmm.
increasingly it's come out that that shouldn't be the case. And that's, at least in my perspective, is not the case of how I would think about it. And the reason is that we are multiple countries, over 50 countries in Africa, and with different laws, different jurisdictions and processes, systems, ecosystem. So the power is actually in not moving from Kenya to Nigeria. It's really thinking about who does Kenya trade with? What markets are similar to Kenya? And so in the case of East Africa, and where Kenya is the East Africa community. In the case of you have Nigeria, it has ECOWAS. In the case of, whether it's Egypt, South Africa, you have COMESA. And so trading within these blocks and thinking about what is the market opportunity, it's really thinking about, goods that go to Uganda come from Kenya. Congo is a massive untapped market that doesn't have good manufacturing. It buys goods from Kenya and other neighboring countries. So all of a sudden, the market opportunity expands beyond the population of one nation without having to say moving from East to West Africa. It's really within these countries that have, like the East Africa community tends to be a borderless community of multiple countries. And so it makes then sense to trade with these communities. And so thinking about tech, thinking about expansion of the opportunity, that's how I think about it within the markets of each of these countries.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Would that mean expanding yourselves geographically, like physically, to these places, or would that mean more that these markets kind like organically come to you as being in Africa, as being in Kenya? Sorry.
So I think that if for Jumba, as we think about how would that future be like, once you've conquered Kenya, it would make sense to go to the neighboring markets, which have existing and natural trade with Kenya. So you're not really creating new routes. You're following existing routes that exist. It would be interesting. We do have certain manufacturers that sit in multiple countries. So that could be one of the ways to go into a new market. We've had situations where you're invited to markets that buy from Kenya. The question is, oh, hey, can you come supply to, for example, DRC as an example? So these have been the ways and how we think about it. So for this year, we are focused in Kenya, but we do believe that there will be that opportunity to go across market.
Very good. Okay. Yeah. Curious question about construction tech as an area. Obviously, we're on the global stage. It's growing, but still quite a small fish in a big pond.
Yeah.
Does that translate also into the African market too, or is it perhaps more of a thing over where you are?
I think it's representative of the African market. There aren't many construction tech players on the continent. So very similar to what you've seen in other markets.
Fair enough. And how does how does sales work then where you are? Is it very much boots on the ground approach? Go and speak to these people. Do you have like is there a lot of digital kind of selling through digital marketing and email and so on and so forth, or is it much more like in person?
So I think the first thing is that Africans are relationship based. We really like talking, engaging before you go directly to the sale. So I think it is a combination. To create awareness, what we had to do was boots on the ground. But at the moment, our customers know us, so we don't have an on-ground team. So we have an internal sales team that then engages with our existing customers. So the customers can discuss, they have their specific sales rep. From an acquisition, the other method we have is actually online through Facebook. So our customers are extremely active on Facebook. And
Wow.
Facebook in particular is quite big here. And so that is one of the avenues that we use to acquire customers. A new one that we are exploring because is quite big is that TikTok is actually quite big with the middle age and older group in Kenya. We don't
Really?
think of it as producing content like dance videos. It really is
Yeah,
how
yeah,
you
yeah.
get news, like what are the trends, etc. So Facebook, very big. You post a video, you have like over 40,000 views, and it really just shows. So we follow that. So we'll have the Facebook acquisition strategy. We'll have a referral strategy. When you're going to a new, let's say, county, town, as an example, you will have one or two, on-ground people. But once you create the brand awareness, you pull back, and then now it's really based on the internal centralized sales that reaches out and engages with the customer.
That's very interesting. So because in the Western world, certainly LinkedIn is the gold standard for definitely B2B sales. It's not the same?
Our hardware stores owner I'd say majority, like overwhelming, do
Yeah.
not have LinkedIn. But they're very active on Facebook and WhatsApp. And so thinking about, we follow how the customer engages. And so it will be a combination of that. So referral, foot on the ground, and Facebook would be it. LinkedIn, not at all.
Kagure, is there any like how is the competition where you are? Is this other similar companies? Is it not really, or is it like a very competitive market? I have no idea.
So I would say that from a tech perspective, like a construction tech perspective, there hasn't been much competition at the moment. The way we would think about it is really, how do you convert how people, buy their goods from the traditional way to using construction tech companies like Jumba. So I'd say this is how we measure and think about it, and less from the construction and like another tech player as a direct competitor.
Yeah. And how about female founder? Is there any like difficulties that come with that, or advantages, or any like nuance that you've noticed or come across since building?
So I would say that I am in a male-dominated industry. Construction is male-dominated.
Oh yeah.
It does help that I have a background in civil engineering, I would say. The difference, nuances, I have a baby. I just got a baby when I was starting a startup, 5-month-old. So I think it's that nuance of running a business while at the same time, starting a family. That would be different and from what you would say traditionally if it was a male founder. But outside of that, thinking about it from the ability to get funding, to get customers, that has really not been the case. I've had a good, experience with my investors, and our customers just want to see value. Are you giving me what I want? It doesn't matter who you are. So that's has been the luck there.
Cool. So a few last questions, just more on the visionary side. If you were to start Jumba again, what would you do differently? Maybe what are some of the lessons that you learned that were like could have been avoided, but like have taught you much more about what you know now that you didn't perhaps a few years ago?
So I was actually just talking about the meeting before this. That's why I'm smiling. I think one of the things is that having a SaaS play and that value being offered to the manufacturers early on would have been great, right? I think that, we're seeing the appetite that's coming from them. And I'm like, oh, we could have done this a year earlier. But that's always the case when you're a founder and just thinking about it. So I'd say that's one of the things. So really thinking about that value proposition from a tech perspective as you build this, and how it goes hand in hand as you continue in the construction material supply chain would be one of the things I would say.
Very good. And what are your ambitions and visions for the future?
So our ambition is to be the to-go-to platform and partner for construction materials in Africa. What does that mean? Our ambition is really that in the markets that Jumba is in, we become the brand that people go to when they want to find out how much is the cost of a carton of tiles. What are the options of tiles that exist in the Kenya market, as an example? And so they want to know price comparison. They want to know what exists. But really, we want to integrate ourselves to be that platform who manufacturers need to manage what it is that they do. And customers go to if they want to find out any information to do with construction. That's where Jumba wants to be. And we believe that, we have just described, the opportunity is vast. And the challenge that often exists here, you really have to conquer one at a time in somewhat very manual ways, reaching the customers, etc. But once you have the footprint, you have a true value such that, any company that's looking to enter Africa, whether it's a manufacturer and they're looking for a partner, let Jumba be that person. Are you an e-commerce company looking to penetrate the continent? Jumba can be that partner for you. And then it's just, when you think construction, you think Jumba.
Nice. I do have one last one. Sorry. You mentioned it earlier, and it came to me just while you were giving that last answer. It was about how you grow a startup whilst also being a mother to a new baby.
Yeah. So
Tough.
that can be its own podcast.
Yeah, I bet.
But in the last few months, I think as a startup founder, the first thing is having a team that is able to work with you. There will be days you have to take leave or you're not able to make it to work. So do you have a strong team that leads different departments? And so they're able to execute while you're not there. I think that's the first one. I think the second one, so then having systems such that the business doesn't run because of you. The business runs on its own. That's very critical. And oftentimes in a startup, that can be a challenge. Before you get to that point, I'd say can be difficult. So having that is one of the things. The second one that I've seen very important, having supportive investors. That, you're going through this and they're going to support you is really very helpful. I've been very lucky to have that in my investors. And I would say, it's something else. And so you make it work, you make it out, being open to support, having a support system in your family, etc. So you juggle. You learn to say no to things that you don't think are necessary, and you're very okay with it because you just have to be able to create time for your business and for your baby. That's what I would say.
Of course. Beautiful. All right, Kagure, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us. This would honestly genuinely be one of my most favorite conversations. Such a new topic area for us to explore. And yeah, sounds like you're having a great time building Jumba. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.